What's going on, guys? Pete Nova here with the Broncos War Room. This is episode number 1, and we're super excited to be here with you today to preview the Broncos versus the Texans here. Week 9, we are kicking off a new podcast. I am joined by my colleague Lou Scattaglia, or Scattaglia. Lou, I probably mispronounced that already. I am not the best at pronouncing names. Anybody that watches me knows that that's probably one of the worst things that I do on these shows is mispronounce names. But how are we doing today, Lou? Did I get the name right or did I mess that up?
You got it on the second try, but it's been mispronounced my entire life, so I'm totally used to it. What matters is the Broncos are 6-2, and we finally have a good football team. That's what matters the most.
Yeah, it does. And it's been a fun season so far. And this is our first episode here. So we're going to try a couple things out, right? And these shows will evolve, possibly be coming out more than just once a week, and also just, kind of trying a couple of things to see what you guys like. So leave some likes, leave some comments below if there's anything you'd like to hear from us going forward, how we preview the matchups. And we'll just jump right into this, right? Denver Broncos taking on the Texans here. They're going on the road to Houston in this matchup. And these are two teams right now that are running really, really hot. But before we get into that matchup, we're going to touch on a little bit of last week's game. Denver, of course, at home against the Dallas Cowboys, absolutely throttled the team. And that was a matchup where, it's a great offense versus, great defense. And really, we were kind of concerned as to, would the offense show up in a soft matchup? They did, scoring over 40 points. And Lou, tell me a little bit about your biggest takeaways. Is there anybody specifically that you want to highlight and talk about that were guys that stood out to you, in that matchup?
Yeah, I mean, after Bo's interception, which if you watch the all 22 or even just like watch the highlights, he actually tried to no-look that throw to Pat Bryant, which I think is funny. One thing Bo Nix does not lack is confidence. And I was watching the game with my brother-in-law and our family, and he's a Cowboys fan. And he threw that interception. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's going to be one of those games where we make it harder than we need to be. But not only did Bo play extremely well, but just the way that the team they never let things get too out of hand. We're all guilty of sort of those emotional reactions after a bad play. But to see the Broncos go on how many scoring drives, 6 or 7 scoring drives the rest of the game was awesome. I thought Bo was decisive. He was comfortable in the pocket. The mechanics were there. He had several just beautifully thrown balls. I was driving home. I guess I missed a Cortland Sutton drop that would have been a touchdown. Apparently, he had a drop. So despite throwing, 4 touchdowns, he could have had another. But this was just a solid game, really, from start to finish from Bo Nix. And I think it's very important to not sort of oversaturate on one bad play. Like, yeah, the interception was bad. No matter how you slice it, it wasn't the wrong route. It was just a bad throw by the quarterback. But it's also important to just take the total body of work. Sean Payton was in his bag, but Bo Nix was executing. He was making throws. He was staying in the pocket. He had comfortable feet. It was a really encouraging game from Bo. I know we'll touch on a couple players we want to see more from, but I mean, I'm curious from you, Pete, who you thought had themselves a game for the Broncos.
Yeah, and to slightly touch on Bo too, we talked about the confidence. I think one thing that has been the biggest concern for me is his confidence has looked a little shaky. And I think this was a huge kickstart. At the end of the day, you play who's on schedule. While this was a soft matchup, you look at it and he took the layups, he took the easy throws, and he also wasn't afraid to let it rip down deep. And I think the one thing that was nice too is just to kind of see him pick on certain players in that matchup as well when the injuries piled up even more. So I think that was encouraging. Moving on to players, a player of mine that I thought stuck out. For me, it's Pat Bryant. And, of course, Troy Franklin, gets more of the glory here because, he was a guy that put up a bigger game in the stat sheet. But Pat Bryant has just done all the dirty things right. And I think that's what Sean Payton's looking for and why Sean Payton, quote unquote, reached on him. I know a lot of people, when they saw how high he drafted Pat Bryant, they were kind of confused as to why so high, but Pat Bryant does the dirty things right. He's involved in the run game as a blocker. And I think you do those little things right, and it earns you more snaps on the field.
Sure.
We've seen in the last 4 weeks, Pat Bryant, 40 offensive snaps, 35, 40, and then 35 again in the last 4 weeks. And if you look at the first 4 weeks of the year, he never went over 30 snaps. So he's getting himself on the field more. He's running more routes, and he's become a guy that, likes to be, they like to target when he's out there, a 28.6% target percentage when he was out there last week against Dallas, and then a 22.2% target percentage against the Giants. We've seen him be the cog that has sprung open a lot of big runs this year. Yeah. We saw it on the RJ Harvey tape, and we saw a couple of plays this week as well. And so it's been encouraging for Pat Bryant. I've liked to see the progress so far, and we're going to need some guys that are going to get dirty against this defense this week against the Texans, which of course we'll get in on and touch on just in a little bit.
Yeah, and I think I'm really glad that you brought up the run blocking with Pat Bryant, because that's obviously not something that will show up in the stat sheet for a receiver. But the fact that we have a 22, 23-year-old rookie that is already a plus blocker in the run game is so encouraging for his development, because that is such a huge part of just getting on the field. You're not going to get the rock unless you block. So I really think by the end of the season, we could be seeing Pat Bryant as a legitimate contributor in this wide receiver room. I do want to kind of flip it to maybe someone that I'd like to see a little bit more from going forward. And this seems kind of odd to say, because Nik Bonnito has been so good for the Broncos ever since signing that extension, and really for the better part of 2.5 years now. Now, at the end of the day, the sacks and the quarterback hits don't always tell the full story. It's also about generating pressure and collapsing pockets and forcing a quarterback to step up or back in the pocket because of the pressure. You would like to see Bonnito kind of start racking up those numbers again. He's been blanked in the sack column ever since the Jets game. He hasn't had a tackle for loss since the beginning of the month. He's had 3 quarterback hits the past 3 games. So, he's still been Nik Bonnito, and Nik Bonnito is still awesome. But I think now that we're approaching some more high leverage games, you kind of want one of your highest paid players to sort of show out. And then if we take it a step further and look to Houston's offensive line, CJ Stroud has been sacked multiple times in every game but one this year. And that was against the 49ers, who don't have a pass rush. So we really need Nik Bonnito and Jonathan Cooper especially to expose this sort of shaky offensive line. And I'm not saying that Nik Bonnito has been bad, but you definitely just want to see a little bit more going forward now that we're approaching midseason into some high leverage games.
Yeah, I would have thought last week would have been a good matchup for him. Tyler Guyton has struggled a little bit this year. Yeah. And so I thought he would have been able to get to the quarterback. Something to monitor here. Sometimes the pass rushers, right, they come in bunches. And, sure. Maybe this week he can kind of turn around in a softer matchup. Again, you mentioned the Texans, their offensive line struggles. So we'll see if he can kind of bounce back and flip that around. And then one more guy that I want to talk about is Alex Palczewski. He steps in right now playing left guard. Matt Parrott goes down, right, as the replacement for Ben Powers. Now Palczewski's kind of been thrusted into this left guard position, and he's looked really well. I mean, you think about the offensive line, they haven't really, of course, the Jets game was a struggle bus, but Matt Parrott was the guy that was in there, and we come to find out at the end of the game that he ends up tearing his knee up and played through that injury. Yeah. But the offensive line has looked good, in the last 2 weeks, and they really took care of business in the trenches against the Dallas Cowboys. Alex Palczewski, it's not talked about a lot, but, he started the final 11 games of his true freshman season at guard, where he was able to switch from left and right when he was at Illinois. So he has the experience coming in and playing as a guard, though, we look at him more as a swing tackle. Sure. The versatility is awesome for him. I'm curious to see what the future holds for him, but I'd like to see him continue to string games along here. We'll see if they add some depth. I'd still like them to add some depth at the guard position. But, with Ben Powers out, he's a guy that's kind of helped this offensive line continue to move and not really miss a beat. So I've been super encouraged with what I've seen so far from Palczewski.
Sure. The one thing I'll say to sort of sum up this first segment is that when you don't hear an offensive lineman's name called, that's usually a good thing. And I'm not sure we've heard Alex Palczewski's name called at all. The one thing I've said about the Broncos is that they sometimes take longer than you'd like to arrive at the right conclusion, but they usually arrive at the right conclusion. So it probably should have been Palcho over Pert from the beginning. But either way, we got there, and he seems to be holding more than his own.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you want to touch on one more guy, or do you want to roll into the next segment here?
I say let's roll into the next segment. We talked about Bo, talked about Bonnito, talked about Bryant and Palcho. I think those were our 4 guys.
Perfect. So yeah, let's preview the week here, and we're recording this on a Thursday. Injury reports start to come out on Wednesdays, and so that's something we're keying in and looking at. Houston Texans, their offense, finally popped last week, which is encouraging for their fans, of course, because they've kind of been the struggle bus all season long. They played the 49ers last week. They popped, and that was without Christian Kirk, who is a steady veteran when he's healthy. And that was without their big guy in Nico Collins. They draft 2 wide receivers in Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins this draft, and those guys stepped up in a big way. Jalen Noel, 2 back-to-back games for them where he's really shown up. And Jaden Higgins finds the end zone last week as a guy that is a big red zone target. You look at the injury report this week for them so far. We have Jalen Petrie limited with a foot injury. Nico Collins with the concussion. He was limited. I'm expecting Nico Collins and Christian Kirk to come back. Both guys limited on a Wednesday, which is typically a veteran rest day. And then you look at some of the DMPs. Lincoln Tomlinson, rest day. So no designation there, but he didn't participate. Dalton Schultz dealing with a knee and shoulder injury, didn't participate. Dylan Horton with a knee, and that's a defensive lineman. And then Danico Autry with a knee, DNP as well. So I think there's a good chance that at least their skill positions, Lou, are going to be at full strength. Yeah. You think about Nico Collins and what he's been able to do. His archetype is a little bit of what we've seen Riley Moss struggle with these bigger physical players at the catch point. So that concerns me a little bit if Riley Moss is going to be the guy that's designated on Nico Collins. What are your thoughts on, the injury report? And then you can kind of go over the Broncos and give us an update of what's going on over there.
Sure. I find it ironic, and it just feels like nothing ever really comes easy for the Broncos, but I find it ironic. And we're obviously not rooting for players to not play, but it's ironic that Collins and Kirk are probably on track to play the week that Patrick Surtain is going to be out. No, he's going to probably miss a couple of other games, but I would be lying if I said I wasn't worried. I think Riley Moss has been excellent this year, and I don't think we can really dispute that. I mean, the statistics tell us that he's been good this year, but he has struggled with those archetypes, as you said, like against Alec Pierce a while ago on the Colts. So I would expect that Riley Moss probably does follow Collins. I don't really think there's another corner that we could confidently match up with Collins. Chris Abrams-Drain is an outside guy, but he's pretty small for the position. And then Jahdae Barron, they kind of envision him long-term on the inside. Obviously, he could probably swing to the outside if needed, but he's obviously kind of in heavy DB packages. So I'm not sure how much of him we're actually going to see. I would like to see some safety help pretty frequently from Hufanga and Brandon Jones. That would be ideal. But then if we look at on the flip side for the Broncos, obviously Surtain is not going to play. He was a DMP. Denver isn't likely to put him on IR, which is encouraging. I do think that Pat wants to be back for that Chiefs game in a couple weeks, and I do think there is an outside chance. He's been remarkably healthy his entire career, and maybe he's just someone that's going to heal in time. I've never had a pectoral injury. I can't speak on it, but we've heard 4 to 6 weeks. We've heard week to week, which could be 2 weeks or 3 weeks. We've heard that he's still a candidate for IR. So it sounds like, at the end of the day, a 3 to 4 week injury. I wouldn't be surprised if the Broncos held him out past the bye and then played him in week 13 when we're in Washington to face the Commanders. But Nate Atkins obviously didn't participate, which kind of stinks because I think he's a little bit of an underrated player for the Broncos in terms of being a plus blocker and then being pretty money in the red zone as a pass catcher. And then Marvin Mims Jr. in the concussion protocol. It is kind of hard for players to clear the protocol. Obviously, Nico Collins just missed the game with a concussion. And with how good Marvin Mims has been and just how clutch he is and how reliable he is, just catching the ball and not really struggling with drops, not having Marvin Mims is obviously going to force Sean Payton to probably get more creative, just because Mims is such a utility knife for the offense. So I think no Mims and no Surtain. I'm trying to not be doom and gloom, but those are going to be two massive absences for the Broncos. And unless something crazy changes, I don't think Mims is going to suit up. But I'm not a doctor, and I don't know how the concussion protocol works. I'm not an independent neurologist, but Mims and Surtain and Adkins all likely not playing here in week 9.
Yeah, and I think it's tough if, we need I think the Broncos need all the help that they can get at the skill position in this matchup. The way I look at this, it's Denver has to win in the trenches because I think the advantage for Houston is in that secondary and / skill position players, at least in the receiving game. I think that they've got more resources right now, especially if Nico Collins can go. And just the fact that you look at the secondary for Houston, it's very, very good, right? We look at Denver and they've got a great secondary, but Houston's secondary is just as good, in my opinion. You look at, Jalen Petrie, he's got 3 interceptions on the year. You have Stingley, who arguably last year, Pat Surtain wins Defensive Player of the Year. If there was going to be a chance for it to go to, maybe another potential guy in the secondary, Stingley was right there. Obviously, I think PS2 outplayed him, but Stingley's maybe not just as good, but he's right there. And then, you look at Lassiter too. Both of those guys have 2 interceptions each this year. So they've been opportunistic in their secondary at causing turnovers. And, if Denver's offensive line, they need to handle this pass rush, right? You have Will Anderson, you have Donnell Hunter, who, those guys are big household names. And ultimately, I think, and I don't want to give out too much, but I think ultimately with the injuries, it's much more of a bigger hit for Denver than it is for Houston, because we need all the help that we can get, especially with our skilled players. So losing Marvin Mims, who can stretch the field, is definitely something that hurts.
Yeah, it does. And I think that kind of does swing us into us kind of chatting about what the Texans have been able to do well lately. You obviously touched on how good that secondary is. It's actually ridiculous how good they are. But, it kind of also starts with DeMeco Ryans. He is just an absolute magician. Building defenses, he's a former player, was a very good player. And he not only has coached up a pretty physical and opportunistic and explosive defense, but he also just kind of oozes that energy on the sideline too. And them playing at home, this is going to be a supercharged defense, kind of looking to stifle the Broncos here. But we both kind of had the same idea here in the pre-show when we were talking about the Broncos offense. We both kind of agreed that the quick passing game is going to be crucial here. Maybe a lot of Evan Ingram, and maybe even a lot of running back receptions from Harvey, even maybe a little bit of J.K. Dobbins. But the one thing I think the Broncos have to do in this game on offense is make the Houston secondary come to them instead of trying to go through the secondary. Just because I think with Mims likely to be out, I just don't think we have the personnel to create a lot of havoc downfield against this Houston secondary. So I could really see a heavy dose of the quick passing game, a lot of those outs to Ingram for 5 or 6 yards, maybe a lot of short crossers in the middle of the field to sort of eat up some yards and extend some drives. Because what does that also do? That also keeps the pass rush from getting home. And as you alluded to in the pre-show, the Texans pass rush actually hasn't been crazy good this year, but Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter are arguably just raw talent-wise the most talented edge duo in the NFL. So these guys know how to rush the passer. It's not about they just stink. They don't stink. They're very good. So a heavy dose of the passing game could not only extend drives, but it's going to eat up yardage. It's probably going to be able to set up the running game, and it's going to keep this crowd quiet. And when you look at Houston, they've won 3 of 4. They're kind of feeling themselves. They're almost back in the playoff picture. You kind of get the sense that this is probably and I don't want to say this is their Super Bowl, but you feel like for them, this is probably their most important game of the season to get back to 500 and to kind of like reset themselves. So Denver's really going to need to excel in that quick passing game. And obviously they're going to have to establish a run, but this Texans defense is going to be an absolute handful no matter what.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about the quick passing game. we've seen Bo Nix struggle a little bit with his passes being batted down. And a lot of it has to do with the predictability of the quick passing, right? A lot of, part of the nice thing, about quick passing is it can slow the pass rush down, but also when the defense is keying in on it, it allows them to get their hands up because they know they're not going to get to the quarterback in time. And I think defenses are also keying in on and saying, this is a great offensive line, right? And their coaches are probably saying, hey, this is going to be a battle. Like, get your hands up because it is going to be a premium to get to the quarterback. And so you're going to have to keep that in mind. Broncos right now utilizing motion 25.35% of the time on their plays. They're also running play action 33.3% on their pass attempts. So that is a big piece in slowing the pass rush down. As we talked about it, Will Anderson, 21.2% pressure rate, shows he's been very effective this season. While he might not be getting to the quarterback and it's not amounting to a ton of sacks for him, he's got 5 on the year. Ultimately, he's still generating pressure. And so Denver's combination of the quick passing, the motion heavy scheme, and solid protection could limit the production and impact for him. And it's something that they need to key into. And let's transition to the next talking point in terms of just what the opponent has been able to do. You look at both of these teams, and the offenses on this side of the ball, they're both only 7 turnovers. Only 7 turnovers for both offenses this year. So that's been pretty encouraging. But just goes to show that this could come down to a turnover, right? Like, whichever team ends up getting silly with the football and that ball security, that could be the biggest turning point in this game. So I think that's the one thing that I think is going to be a big decider is who's going to get that turnover, because both teams are averaging less than 1 a game this year.
Yeah, I think this is shaping up to be one of those dogfights where it's like, who can either steal some quick points or make the least amount of mistakes. And then my mind immediately went to, oh shoot, where the Broncos get called for 73 penalties a game. So are we going to penalize ourselves to death and see the game go out of reach? One thing I did think earlier today, it kind of came to me that with how good this defense is, I really wouldn't be surprised to even see like a couple trick plays to try and steal some chunk yardage, like a 40-50 yard gain, maybe some play action, and you just have to see if one of Sutton or Troy Franklin can just get over top of the secondary just once to try and get into points range. I even wouldn't be shocked to see Will Lutz being trotted out there for a 50-plus yard field goal attempt, maybe on more than one occasion, just because I think this could be a game where it's like the first to 20 points wins, the first to 17 points wins. No team has really been able to consistently move the ball against this Texans defense. And then you kind of couple that with the Broncos' self-inflicted wounds. I actually kind of see a little bit of a tougher path for Denver to win this game, but we've talked about the quick passing game. Maybe the Broncos can have success with that. Maybe they can try and take the top off of the defense once or twice to try and steal some possessions. And I go back to what Vance Joseph said a couple weeks ago. He was asked about the lack of turnovers, and he said, I'm not worried because they come in bunches. We had an interception of Jackson Dart a couple weeks ago, and then we had 2 more interceptions of Dak Prescott. So we have 3 picks in our last 2 games, which is a much higher than normal average. We had 15 interceptions last year. So maybe Vance Joseph is right. Maybe the rookie Woody Marks, the Texans running back, maybe he's careless with the football once or twice. Maybe we force CJ Stroud into a tight throw and Brandon Jones or Riley Moss even comes up with a timely interception. But I am with you that this game is going to come down to, who can make that extra play? Like whoever makes that one more play, whether it's a wild turnover, a muffed punt, who can make the 58-yard field goal with a minute and a half left? Because I look at the Texans at home, Pete, they're 2-1 at home. They've won 3 of 4 overall. Their secondary allows the lowest passer rating in the NFL. It's below a 71. And lastly, they allow 11.7 points per game at home, which is a ridiculously low amount. They did shut out the Tennessee Titans at home, which, it's the Titans. I mean, they took care of business, but this is going to be a dogfight, even maybe kind of like that 2023 matchup with when Russell Wilson was still in town. It was kind of one of those dogfights in the end. Obviously, Russ had thrown 3 interceptions that game and threw one in the end zone. I could honestly see the game shaking out where it's just, again, who makes that opportunistic play at the end? Who can make the least self-inflicted wounds? That's going to be who wins this game.
Yeah, I'm with you, and you talked a little bit about CJ Stroud, and I want to touch on him a little bit, right? 14th in the NFL for passing yards. He's been very good at kind of limiting the turnovers. Just 5 interceptions this year, which is tied with Bo Nix. The thing I worry about the most is this is a team that pace of play in the Texans. Right. They're 27th in the NFL. They're a very slow, methodical team where if they can, control the football, the Broncos offense might not get that many opportunities, right? Especially if they can sustain drives. That's really my biggest concern. And then, you touched on it too about the penalties. Denver's going to need to play a clean football game. I think if Denver can go in there and, not start this game slow and be ready to go, I feel confident that they're the better team and they'll win. Sure. But they cannot afford to go into a tough environment on the road in Houston against a team that, is a tough football team that's going to control the football. And they can't afford to start slow in this game because I don't think they're going to have that many opportunities. No. So that's my biggest concern there. The other thing I would say is, CJ Stroud right now, 50 of his passes have been pressured throws. So that's 11th in the NFL. So again, we talked about the offensive line. They've been struggling, but this is also a team that likes to throw the football down the field, right? He's 11th when it comes to deep ball attempts this year. And so they're going to test us, especially with Nico Collins back, especially with Pat Surtain out this week. And it's really going to be, how do they respond? You don't want to sit there and get caught with your pants down early in this game where, they suck the life out of you with a big play and set the tone early. So I'm looking for Denver the most important thing is to come out ready to go in this game and not start this game off slow.
Yeah, I think my mind immediately went to if Bo Nix throws another interception on the Broncos' first offensive drive. Like, that's the type of interception that could be the deciding factor in this game. You could get away with it at home against the 35th ranked defense in the NFL. But when you're against a tough defense like the Texans, you just can't make that error. You're going to need a really clean and efficient game from Bo. And he doesn't have to throw for 300 yards and 4 touchdowns, but you're going to need a very efficient, clean, no nonsense type of game. And then you even mentioned the Texans' pace of play being one of the slowest in the NFL. That's another great point where Denver might not have many drives to score points. So maybe we see them even try something fancy on a 4th down. And it goes back to one of the previous points we made is Denver just might have to get creative here to try and steal some points. Maybe that's when Sean Payton is his best, because Sean Payton is kind of like that evil genius and you don't really know what he's going to cook up. Whether it's, just a play you don't see coming, or like Wildcat with RJ Harvey in the backfield, like that type of thing. I think we're pretty much in lockstep here with how challenging this game could be. CJ Stroud is going to test this secondary down the field. So maybe Brandon Jones and Talanoa Hufanga can have themselves a day, but there really isn't an easy path for Denver to win this game at all. And obviously as Broncos fans, we want the team to win and we want it to be a blowout. But as analysts of the game itself, we have to call a spade a spade. This is going to be a tough game. But I believe we're the better team. I believe we have the better roster. And I think our quarterback has been a little bit better this year. So maybe that swings the game just enough in our favor.
Yeah. And let's shift over to the last segment here. Let's talk about predictions and thoughts. We've kind of tiptoed around a little bit of what we think this game is going to be, how we see it playing out. I think I'm going to give one prediction and then just some thoughts, and then I'll kick it to you. I think right in this game, I think J.K. Dobbins is going to touch the ball 20 times. I think this is going to be a game where, I don't think you can mess around with Harvey where, you're trying to stretch runs and you're trying to play cute with this defense. This is going to be a team that you're going to have to go at hard. And I think Dobbins can put his head down. Number 2 in the NFL, this Denver team is in rushing in the red zone, which a lot of that's been Harvey at times too. Yeah. We saw him score the Wildcat Texans defense 30th in red zone run defense. So I'm predicting Harvey is going to have, I'm not sorry, Dobbins is going to have 20 touches. I also think Denver is going to come up with a strip sack here. That's going to change the tide and the momentum in this game. I'm predicting a low scoring game, somewhere around 24 to 20. Denver will win this one. That's my prediction. They go on the road here. I'm thinking J.K. Dobbins, 20 touches. And I'm thinking a strip sack that's going to change the tide and the momentum in this game. And Denver comes out with it 24 to 20.
I really like that strip sack prediction. I actually wrote up my weekly bold predictions on predominantly orange. I have 3 myself. The first one, I actually think Riley Moss is going to have a pick 6 here. I believe this because I think CJ Stroud is going to test the heck out of Riley Moss. And the one thing I have seen from him personally is just how much this kid can bounce back and just not let a bogus penalty or a reception get to him. He really has been so consistently good all year. He's allowed one of the lowest completion percentages in the NFL. And I just know CJ Stroud is salivating at the mouth to be able to test the secondary without Pat Surtain. But I mean, Riley Moss is someone who is also frequently around the ball. I mean, he's made a lot of plays on the ball, breaking up passes this year. So I kind of think I'm going to be a wise guy and predict that Riley Moss has a pick 6. The second prediction I had was Will Lutz nailing a 60-yard field goal. I kind of touched on this earlier where I think Denver is going to have to not mess around and take the points. And while it might not seem wise to kick a 60-yard field goal away from home, Texans obviously are in that dome where it's a retractable roof. It's turf. So obviously it's not grass, but turf is pretty consistently not an issue in terms of special teams. It's going to be 70 degrees in there with like 30% humidity. It's going to be ideal conditions for a long field goal. Will Lutz's career long is 60 yards, right? So I feel like he's going to get the chance. He's made all of his 50-yard attempts this year. I think he's going to get the chance to kick a 60-yard field goal, and I think he's going to put it through the uprights. I think Will Lutz has been a very underrated part of this entire operation. Unfortunately, though, as much as I want my Broncos to win, I do kind of think they dropped this game. My score prediction was 20-17 Texans. I don't know if you picked this up, Pete, but there are eerie similarities between this game and the game against the Texans in Houston back in 2023. In both instances, Denver has won 5 in a row coming into the game. And in both instances, obviously the game is in Houston, but the Texans have also won 3 of 4 coming into this game. Really, the main difference is that Bo Nix is the quarterback and Russell Wilson isn't. I mean, the Texans have the same coaching staff, many of the same players. I'm not saying that's like impacting my decision, but I'm also kind of getting like PTSD of, oh my gosh, we're going to lose an ugly, disappointing game. I just kind of think that as good as I think Denver can be this year, I just think this is a game that they lose and it's going to be a close game. They're not going to get blown out or anything. I just kind of see the home team winning this one 20-17, but obviously I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah, I could see it too. I think it's a tough game, a tough matchup here. But ultimately, I don't think this is going to be the most exciting game that you're going to watch on the slate this week. I think it's going to be a pretty ugly game. I'd love to see an offensive explosion from Denver. That would really instill confidence in us, especially after last week. And this is the toughest matchup they've had all year defensively. But that's going to do it for us, guys. Thank you so much for watching episode 1 here from me and Lou here on the Broncos War Room. If you are here, make sure you like and subscribe. Good luck to the Broncos this week, and we'll see you guys next time.